Hi everyone, my name is Darryl Panes, CEO at As Good as Gold Australia, and this evening, once again, I'm joined by my brother Brian and partner at As Good as Gold. And this evening we have an amazing guest. But before I introduce you to our guest this evening, I'd like to take you back, if I could, to a movie that I watched a number of years ago. I'm sure you'll all remember it. It was in part 2 of the Back to the Future trilogy. A character by the name of Biff Tannen gained access to a sports almanac that provided 50 years of sports statistics. Now imagine that, a book written in the future, but available to you in the present. If you were a betting man, you could wreak havoc. And Bill Tannen did exactly that. He went on to make a fortune. Tonight, we interview a man who has written his own almanac, much better than Biff's, providing uncanny predictions about the future. He is regarded as the world's #1 trends forecaster, including predictions about terrorism, war, and economic collapse. He is the publisher of the Trends Journal, is a business consultant, is the author of 3 books, including Trend Tracking and Trends 2000, and has appeared as a guest on media outlets such as CNN, The Today Show, Good Morning Australia, CBS Morning News, NBC Nightly News, and Coast to Coast AM. I speak, of course, of the one and only Mr. Gerald Celente. Good morning, Gerald.
Good morning, Darryl and Brian.
Thank you. Fantastic to have you on board, Gerald. Look, this is an absolute privilege to be able to interview this evening. I'd love to know is how you started in this industry. Very often it's a mum and a dad, it's a parent that, as was the case with us, my father had an engineering business and he said to Brian and myself, you need to do this. And we said, okay, that was it. I don't know if it was as simple with you, but I'd really like to know who it was that influenced you initially, how young you were, and what led to you being involved in the industry as you are today. If you could share that information with our clients and our subscribers, I'm sure they'd all love to know. If you could part with that information, thank you so much.
It's kind of like, you know, in yours, but different. It was all my ancestors, not all of them, but a lot of them behind me. And, you know, I attribute everything I am to them, and that's what they passed on to me. So my father, for example, when I was a little kid, I'd be driving along and I'd be shooting my mouth off, and in Italian, he'd look at me and give me a disgusted look. And he'd say, Papagallo, parrot, stop repeating what everybody else is saying and think for yourself.
Yeah.
And I realized that before I said anything, I better have the facts in place rather than repeating what everyone else was saying.
Yeah.
And my mother, may her soul rest in peace, when I was a little kid, before I knew what the word meant, she used to say to me if an incident broke out, I hate cowards. Can you imagine a mother telling a kid that today? They'd probably have her arrested, you know? But so I came from a family where you became yourself and reminded how blessed you were to have all you had. And so at a graduate school, you know, I really wasn't, you know, that enthused about going to work. As a matter of fact, I was bartending down the city. And my mother passed away right after graduate school, so I moved back home. And I moved up to Yonkers. I was living in the city, born in the Bronx. And there was a mayoral campaign. And I decided, well, why not work on this thing? So I was the #2 guy running the mayoral campaign in Yonkers, New York, a city of about 300,000 people.
Okay.
And I got to the top right away.
Right.
And then they sent me to do other campaigns after that. The guy became the longest running mayor in the history of the city. His name was Angelo Martinelli. And then they sent me up to Albany, and I was the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate. And that was the worst job I ever had. And what would happen was I'd be standing in the back of the chamber with my friends. You know, a young guy, what do you talk about? You know, girls, sports, cars. And all of a sudden, they'd have a flunky. They call him a sergeant at arms. This fat slob opening a door so these jerks could walk through. So my friends would leave me one at a time and follow these senators to their seat and pull out the chair and help them sit down. And I wouldn't do that. And they'd come back and they say, you know, Gerald, if you don't do that, you're not going to make it here. And I said, listen, I don't do things to suck my way up to the top. So I left that job, and then I designed and instructed American politics and campaign technology at St. John's University. From there, I went on to become the chief government affairs specialist for the chemical industry. And there's a picture of me over there with Ronald Reagan. I hired him to speak to our group 2 days before he ran against Jerry Ford. Spent an hour and a half with him. I got a long story too. John Connally, the guy that got shot sitting in front of Kennedy. That's a picture of him over there, him and his wife in front of the book depository. The only time back since the assassination. So I got into the political circle. And in D.C., what happened was the Iranian conflict was happening. And I was living between Chicago and D.C. at the time. And Jimmy Carter came back from spending the New Year's Eve with the Shah and his wife. And gets off the helicopter, salutes, makes a statement that the Shah is the island of stability in the Middle East. And at that moment, I became a political atheist. I've been around long enough. One of the sayings we have in the Bronx, and you could say this word now because they use dirtier words. We used to have a saying, bullshit has its own sound. And when Trump said that, I knew what happened, the overthrow of Mossadegh by the MI6 and the CIA in 1953, and the Savak, the secret police of the Shah, what a brutal dictatorship it was. So when these revolutions started happening, I knew this thing was real. So now, becoming a political atheist, then I said to myself, what will be the implications? I'm a 30-year-old guy, and I realized that gold and oil prices would go up. So I started to play the futures market. Mm-hmm. No one's playing gold futures back then. When I say no one, I'm talking about very few people. Yeah. And I parlayed a $5,000 bet into nearly $750,000.
God, wow.
Back then. And by the way, I went on to lose most of it. And that's how I learned about the markets. Right. So that was the beginning. I quit my job. I didn't like what I was doing. At 28 years old, I was putting on meetings at the Hay Adams, which is the top hotel to do that in DC, and staying at the Willard. And I just I was killing environmental legislation. And I was doing it basically for the money. And then I realized, I started growing up, and I said, I can't do this anymore. So that's the combination of things that happen. And I realized that if you look at things for the way they are and not the way you want them to be, you can see what's going on. So if you call yourself, for example, a liberal, a Democrat, a Republican, or a conservative, or I believe in this is my religion, this is my belief system, this is what I believe, knock yourself out, man. Do whatever you want. I just look at the things as the way they are, not the way I want them to be. And the other point is that rather than an economist, for example, I look at geopolitics on a continual basis, social change, environmental, cultural, on and on and on. We look at over 300 different trend categories, making connections between different fields rather than focusing on your interest. Right. So all things are connected, like the blood which unites us all, as Chief Seattle was alleged to have said. So that's basically the story in a nutshell.
Wow, it's a lot more exciting than mine is. I wish I'd have met you about in the year 2000. That would have been invaluable to us, Gerald. My father started in business in the 60s when the automotive industry was really on a roll. And we had 4 automotive companies in Australia at the time. It was Ford, General Motors, Holden's, Mitsubishi, Toyota. And they just flooded him with work. However, The year 2000 comes around and we lost a lot of the business to international competition, particularly out of China and Korea and places like that. And a lot of the industry, well, we have no manufacturing. We have no automotive industry in Australia today. If we had seen that coming, and there were indications of it, but it wasn't a clear picture. If we'd have known or been a little bit more aware of what was going to happen, a lot of people would have been able to get out of the industry and got into something else, but that just didn't eventuate. I'm glad though that I've met you anyway. It hasn't saved the engineering and manufacturing in Australia, but it's great to catch up now. One thing we've learned, Gerald, about predicting the future is that history tells us a great deal. And I'd like your comments there. But a gentleman by the name of Sir Winston Churchill said, the further we look back in the history, the more we can see into the future. And we can see that. A lot of people recognize that. It seems that governments fail to do so. But you have a look and the Federal Reserve and the banking system. Egypt, Athens, Rome, USA, all at one stage held powerful positions globally. Okay, they were the leading nations in the world. 5,000, and they held the reserve, basically the reserve currency status. 5,000 years, 3,800 fiat currencies, all gone to zero. Not one has survived. Wars, currency debasement led to bankruptcy. And this is exactly what's happening now. We're just seeing more of the same. Ongoing wars in the Middle East and Syria, trade wars creating uncertainty, petro-yuan putting the dollar under pressure, unprecedented global debt. We now have the inevitable increase in interest rates, impacting stocks, real estate, and the bond market. How long can the economy stand up before the bubble bursts? And Gerald, what do you think? Can you identify what you believe anyway will be the Black Swan event that does take the economy down, and when?
Well, beginning with the Black Swan event, and that's going to be what's going on in the Middle East, in the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia's war against Iran. If they just came out last week, the former head of Mossad, the intelligence agency of Israel, reported that Netanyahu back in 2011 wanted to invade Iran, or attack Iran, I should say, and they talked him out of it. They wouldn't do it. And that's continuing right now, and the rhetoric keeps heating up, particularly with Trump and moving the embassy to Jerusalem against international law, the continuation of what's going on in Israel, and Trump's allegiance with Israel and Saudi Arabia, and what's going on in Yemen, the United States blaming Iran, of course, for the problems going on there, although people don't recognize that the Houthis have been there over 1,000 years. The Saudi gang just began in 1934 with that country, which they named after themselves. So the hatred against Iran is really building. And you mentioned before about currencies and how long they've been around. Well, the Persians have been around quite a long time, too, and they're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And they haven't invaded a country in about 250 years. So what we're looking at is that is the biggest Black Swan event, because if that happens, then you're going to see oil prices spike.
Yes.
And when oil prices spike, then you're going to see inflation escalate and, excuse me, and the people unable to keep supporting the consumer economy. On the grander scale, and you mentioned it before about what Winston Churchill said, and it relates to trend forecasting, because tracking trends is an understanding of where we are, how we got here,
yes,
and where we're going.
Yeah.
Having said that, no one can predict the future. Again, there are too many wild cards.
Yes.
So when does it collapse? I've gotten it wrong before. I thought in 2012 that was going to be it. They didn't teach me in Economics 101 or in graduate school, something called zero and negative interest rate policy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And quantitative easing.
Yes. Okay.
So what I'm saying is the criminals in charge will do anything they can to keep stealing. That's what thieves do.
Yes.
And so the thievery of the central banksters is going to do anything they can to keep the Ponzi scheme going.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's very difficult to predict when it will crash. It should have crashed a long time ago.
Yes.
And you mentioned interest rates. And we saw what happened back in February in the States when the fear that interest rates would go up more aggressively this year because this is really terrible and it's something that we all should be very concerned about. Employee wages were going up, and that would cause inflation. How dare those people get higher wages?
Yeah.
When you have in the United States 3 people, Buffett, Gates, and Bezos, have more money than 60% of us combined. How dare your wages go up in Slavelandia?
Yeah.
So that was the one that shook the markets and pushed them into correction territory briefly. So now the fear is on higher interest rates. Let's go back now and see what just happened in Europe with Italy and Spain.
Yeah.
And the fear that there's going to be pressure against the euro. So if Italy, and I believe they're going to, I believe the first shot has been fired against the eurozone. And the prime minister, the minister of economics, who they rejected and tried to stop the formation of the union between the Five-Star Movement and Lega, was because Paolo Savona, an 81-year-old guy, wrote a number of books and basically cleared it very simply, that the euro and the eurozone was only to the benefit of Germany. Germany is the second largest exporter of product in the world, beats the United States. They couldn't export all that product if their currency was called the Deutschmark. They do it because it's cheaper with the euro. Yeah. But that's brought down all the other countries because they can't devalue their currencies. Yeah. So Savona made it very clear. He said, all we are colonies of Germany.
Right.
And that the other nations are cowards and they won't fight back. And by the way, that's the underlying story of this all. The world is filled with cowards. People that let these little jerks called politicians run and ruin their lives. And they don't stand up to them. And anybody could Google up the definition of politician. Someone that selects or runs for office, blah, 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 blah. And the second one is someone who's manipulative and devious to gain advancement within an organization. I'm not making this up.
Yep.
So what we have is manipulative and devious people, and people argue, my manipulative and devious jerk is better than your manipulative, devious jerk. So going back to the economy, going back to Italy, going back to where the global economy is heading, it's going to blow up. There's no question about it. It's only the when.
Yeah.
And I believe that war will happen possibly before the when, and the war will be in the Middle East.
Right. I was sitting at a conference going back about 12 months ago, and I saw the speaker had completed his presentation. The young lady stood up and said, most of the people in this room are a lot older than me. She said, maybe something you've overlooked is the fact that the younger generation are able to handle debt a lot easier now. They have in control of debt. The speaker said, Madam, I only know of one way to go broke, and there has only ever been one way to go broke, and that's to have too much debt. And that it's never changed, has it? And that's where these countries are sitting at the moment. So, I mean, you're right. And it's just, the whole exercise has just been kicking the can further down the road. just feeding enough money to a number of these countries, Italy and typically, just feeding them enough money just to keep them propped up, but not enough to allow them for their economy to grow. So, I mean, it's got to lead to a major default, doesn't it?
Yes, but it's going to see what's happening in Italy. This could be the beginning of something big, because both Cinque Stelle, the five-star movement, and Lega, they're not pro-Eurozone at all, particularly Lega. Yep. And if they pull out, you're going to see the collapse of the euro, and that'll collapse the global economy, because it is the second largest reserve currency.
Yes.
And, although we talk about the petro yuan, and last week down in Zimbabwe, you had 17 central bank officials from African nations meeting with China to talk about using the yuan, the Chinese currency, as their reserve currency. So this is the beginning of the end, and the end could come quickly because it's now in place, but it has a long way to go, because China as a reserve currency right now is only about, at best, 2 to 3% being used. But it could change dramatically, as the example of the dollar replacing the pound. It happened very swiftly in the earlier parts of the 20th century.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's in place to happen.
Yeah.
And when the petrodollar dives, you're going to see inflation at levels that will resemble what it looked like in the Weimar Republic. And people will be going to Walmart with wheelbarrows filled with dollars. That's a reality. Yeah. Because this whole thing is nothing but a hoax. And again, it's only being done to enrich the rich. And I could give no finer example of proof than Trump's tax cuts. Where has the money gone? And where is it going?
Yeah.
It's going into stock buybacks and merger and acquisition activity that's at record highs for this time of the year.
Yeah.
It's not going into capital improvements. No. And we said it wouldn't, because you go back to when that other war criminal, George Bush, they all disgust me. It's just a freak show. When I was a kid, they had a thing called the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. Yes. And they said it was the greatest show on earth.
Yes.
Welcome to the greatest freak show on earth. So going back to Bush, when he let them repatriate their money overseas back in, I think it was about 2004, 2005, 96% of the money went into tax buybacks. So you don't have to be a genius to figure it out. It goes back to tracking trends as an understanding of how we got here, where we are, and where we're going.
I know where $185 million is sitting right now. It seems as though Barack Obama's older daughter, and I can't remember her name, but she's 19 years old, I believe, still going to school. But she's worth $185 million at the moment. You'd have to question that, wouldn't you, as to how that was obtained? A little bit of skullduggery?
No. Look, we're living in a neo-feudal society. There's different laws for the political nobility and the economic elite for the rest of us peasants in Slavelandia. You get caught. The cops are everywhere around here. The Kingston police are great, by the way. They don't bother you for you didn't stop for a full stop for that stop sign. They don't do that here. But the state troopers, man, holy, they should call me SS troopers. We're 15 minutes from Woodstock over here, and there's a route called 28. You get off the New York State Thruway, and then there's a short strip to get to there. So people are going, like 70 miles an hour, and then they get off. Now they got to go like 45. So they pull you over all the time, and they pull you over, and it's, where'd you come from? Did you have anything to drink? Well, I had 2 glasses of wine. Get out of the car, stand on your head, repeat the alphabet backwards. And you can't do that. Then they lock you up. And once they lock you up in the United States, when you go to jail, They could stick their fingers up, you know what, from male and female to see if you got anything up there.
Yeah, yeah, I believe that.
But you start wars like slimy little lowlife pieces of garbage, like the arrogant piece of crap prize Nobel winner Obama, destroying Libya, destroying Syria. Hey, isn't he great? Don't you wish you had? And how about George Bush? I'll tell you, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al Qaeda. Oh, yeah, you lying bastard. How come you're not in jail? Hey, how about those guys from the Goldman Sachs gang and the Merrill Lynch mob and all those other bankers that get convicted their banks on felonies?
Yeah.
Not one head rolls.
Yeah, exactly.
But we, the little people, you better pay. You better be good.
Yeah.
And all these little cops that get off beating up people like you see that clip out of New Jersey over here?
No, I didn't. No.
Oh, Google that one up. New Jersey police brutality woman. You go to the beach on Memorial Day weekend. What do you want to do? You're a young person. You want to have a couple of beers. You want to have a good time. He's not doing anything. She had alcohol, and she wasn't 21 years old. What a joke. 21 years to drink, right? Yeah, but you can get your brains blown out at 18 years old when you join the army and they send you to fight a war in a foreign country that's done nothing to you. This cop, she said, leave me alone. You're bothering me. I haven't done anything wrong. They gave her a breathalyzer test on the beach. That's what these little jerks are doing, harassing people at the lowest level while they bow down and suck up and salute the commander-in-chief and any other little clown. Anyway, this guy starts punching the crap out of her and saying she's resisting arrest.
Wow.
That's where the United States is gone.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I thought I'd get you fired up.
It's disgusting.
Oh no, absolutely. Brian, we'd better get on to question 2. Otherwise we'll be here for about 8.5 hours.
Yeah, maybe the next question might be a bit lighter, Gerald. But anyway, I just would like to set the stage, though, for this question, which involves why not the power of a gold standard. And I'm going to take you back in Australia to the automotive industry, and we're going to go to 1985, where a Ford motor car sedan would cost $11,000. But in the same year, if you wanted to pay in gold, you could, and it would cost you 24 ounces of gold. So $11,000 fiat currency, 24 ounces of gold. We move forward approximately 30 years to 2012, $35,000 that now car is, or 23 ounces of gold. So it's dropped 1 ounce of gold. Another few more years pass, and we got to 2015, $39,000 for the car, 27 ounces of gold. So it has gone up a couple of ounces. The last year that we were manufacturing in Australia, the 2017 Ford car was $40,000.
Wow.
But it went down to 23 ounces of gold. Remarkable. So what we see between 1985 and 2017 is a 235% increase in dollars, but a 0 to 11% increase in gold. I've got a question coming up here, but I want to take you back to the Model T Ford, which is obviously produced in the States. 1908, the Model T Ford cost $365, but 18 ounces of gold. Now, if you like to look at that, 1908 to present day, in dollar terms, that car has gone up 10,500%, but in gold, 30 to 35%. Now, if we reset the price of gold to $10,000, as Jim Rickards is saying we should be doing, then the real price of a 2018 Ford Motor Company Ford car would be 3 to 4 ounces of gold. That's real productivity. Now, here's my question. Considering that Russia and China are increasing their gold reserves at a very fast pace, and other countries are wanting their gold back in their own central banks, what trends are you seeing with regards to gold being used again in a new financial system? And when is that most likely?
Well, first I'd like to say what a great analogy that is, that the history of what you just said.
Thank you.
And of course, the reason they got us off the gold standard, I mentioned that I was with John Connally. And John Connally was, again, he was the Democratic senator, a governor of Texas that was sitting in front of Kennedy that took the bullet in the back. But he was also the Republican under Richard Nixon, the Treasury Secretary. And when they took us off the gold standard in I believe it was 71.
That's right.
And by the way, as we're going back into the Anatole Hotel, Connally said to me, I read your book, Trend Tracking. It's a fine piece of work. And he said, I know your heart's in the right place. He said, but you don't have a clue what's going on. And neither do the American people. Because if they did, there'd be a revolution in this country. Mm. And we stayed in contact. I knew he was going to die. He had lung problems from the bullet going through his through his back, through his lung, through his hand, through his... Anyway, he had adhesions and he was on heavy doses of prednisone. We stayed in contact from October to February, and then he died in April. And going back to what you're saying about the gold standard, they took us off because of the inflation being generated as a result of our Vietnam War and supporting that and trying to placate the country and building up more debt by keeping them quiet with some social programs. So that was the beginning of the end of the gold standard here and the gold standard worldwide. Going back to your question, I believe gold is already being used as a means of exchange because it goes back to the petro-yuan. And so China, for example, the largest purchaser of oil and gas in the world, we don't want to deal with dollars anymore. And we're buying it from Saudi Arabia, by the way, and that's when we set up the deal with, we'll protect you guys, but you have to put this thing, call it the petrodollar. You have to sell all your OPEC oil and price it in dollars. That was the deal that was made in '73 with Kissinger. They said, we don't want to use dollars. So now they're even buying oil from Saudi Arabia, but they're paying them in yuan. But here's the deal. You could cash that yuan into gold.
Yep.
So it's already being looked at as the exchange currency.
Yep.
Now we're looking at Russia, and what did they announce this week? They're going to increase their exploration and production of gold. And as with all of the sanctions that Russia has on them and the difficulties that they're going through, they have a pretty good base of reserve currency compared to other nations. And it's because of a lot of it is in gold. Yeah. So we see it happening, but there's going to be a continual fight against it by the central banksters.
Of course.
So regardless of their fighting, again, what is the greatest safe haven asset in the world? Gold.
Has to be gold.
Yep.
It is. So what happens is that when you, again, making a globalnomic observation of it, let's go back to one of the first questions you asked me. What's the wild card? War in the Middle East. What's the greatest commodity that you could own when all else fails? Gold.
Yeah.
So gold price, now on the downside of gold now is basically the United States raising interest rates.
Yeah.
Because the higher the interest rate goes, the stronger the dollar gets, there's an opportunity cost of holding gold. Having said that, will the Fed raise rates 3 more times this year or only 2. Now let's make a globalnomic assessment. Hey, what happened in Italy last week? What's going on with the euro? Oh, they still have negative interest rates over there? And they're not going to raise interest rates maybe till the middle of 2019? So if the United States raises interest rates, and they're not going to raise interest rates maybe in Europe until middle 2019, and now probably longer because of the problems going on there, what happens to the euro? It crashes. So what are you going to go into? Gold.
Gold. Mm.
So that is the big one that I see not being talked about.
Yeah.
The United States is in a catch-22.
Between a rock and a hard place.
You got it.
Mm.
Oh, and how about those interest rates over there in the UK? What are they, 0.50? And they're not going to raise them.
No.
Now let's go.
Ours are not much better at 1.5.
1.5.
Exactly. Now let's go and look at the latest reports coming out about a global slowdown. And what did we begin the conversation with? Talking about Germany. I was talking about the euro. There's a slowdown going there. So now with a global slowdown,
Nowhere to move on interest rates.
you got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic answer, Gerald.
Yeah.
I'll continue with another question. We have seen incredible growth, like yourselves, in the cryptocurrencies in the last 12 months. And there has even been mention of a gold-backed crypto. But knowing that cryptocurrencies are also fiat currencies, what trend, if any, are there to having them gold-backed?
I believe this whole cryptocurrency, at first I thought it was a scam, and with Bitcoin, I really, I didn't. Yeah, and then I saw it grow. And again, it's not what you believe, it's what's going on, and you have to observe it. There are too many financial institutions becoming involved in the whole cryptomania as we see it for it to go down. So we believe it has a future. And the future is very clear when you look, for example, on Election Day, November 8th, 2016, in the United States. Over there in India, the Prime Minister Modi called in, 86% of the cash. Remember that one?
Yes, I remember that one.
So what are they trying to do? Make people go digital.
Yeah.
What do you do in China when you buy things? Do you use credit cards or yuan? Digital.
Digital. Yeah.
The world is going digital. I believe there are going to be more and more digital currencies. And I believe, of course, a gold-backed digital currency. They have what? A Bitcoin Gold or a BCG or something like that, I believe. And there are ones backed by gold already. And I believe that it's going to continue. There's going to be ups and downs, but here's the down. The banks don't want it to happen because it makes banking obsolete. And governments are going to do everything they can to crack down on it. So that's the push and the pull of it. So even when we look at Bitcoin, which is down now, let's say in the low 7,000 a coin, and it was up to 20,000.
Yeah, that's right.
Before they allowed it to be exchanged on the futures market.
Correct.
Very correct.
And I told everyone in our Trends in the News broadcasts, and again, you asked me how I got started in the business. And I said, I played futures.
Yeah.
And I lost almost everything that I made. So I know how that game is played. I know now I know what a naked short is. And don't report me to Me Too. I don't mean it like that, I wasn't talking about those kind. So
Gerald, sorry, Gerald, we spoke with Eric Sprott when he was on visit to Australia a few months ago. And this was when cryptocurrencies were going through the roof and Bitcoin was heading towards 20,000. And we asked him what he thought the future was. And he said, well, Darryl, he said, Brian, once the CME get involved, he said, just forget it. He said they'll stop it in its tracks. And sure enough, within a few days, it was all over. It just came tumbling down.
Oh yeah, and he knows his stuff, man. I mean, this guy's been at it a long time. And so that's it. And so, but even having said all this, right? A Bitcoin's still worth 7,000 US dollars.
Yeah.
That's a lot of dough.
Yes, it is.
So that's why we're saying it's not going away.
Going away. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'd like your response on this. I think that a lot of people make the mistake of assessing the value of gold in American dollars. I'll say, like, what's gold today? It's 1,350 US. However, if we look at Venezuela at the moment, most Venezuelan, well, the average Venezuelan wage at the moment is about $7 US a month. And the average Venezuelan is experiencing starvation and massive poverty. Just imagine 10 years ago, if governments had sort of suggested what was about to take place and gave the Venezuelans time to prepare, just imagine they'd put aside and bought a gram of gold for 32 months on end, so they had an ounce of gold. It would have purchased them. They would have been able to exchange it for 5 years food for their family. And a lot of people will say, well, okay, that's all right. That's Venezuela, or that's Argentina, or that's Turkey. But it's really everywhere. I mean, when we look at it, I mean, the Australian dollar's lost 97% of its value since 1913. So too has the American dollar. I mean, I think what we should be doing more, and this is what we should be explaining to people, don't value gold or equate it to gold to US dollars all of the time. It's more about what you can get in exchange for gold. And I think that's going to become more prevalent as we move into the next year, 2, 5, 10 years. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think you're 100% correct.
Yeah.
And remember Hugo Chavez, the former leader of Venezuela, what did he do? He bought a load of gold.
Yeah. Yeah.
Put their reserve currencies into gold.
Yes.
And so as the Bolivar is going down, they got that gold.
Yep.
And so I agree with you. It should. Why is it? Again, because the United States is the top reserve currency. And that's why that's why the mentality is to value it in dollars. But when that changes, and it is changing,
yes,
then it's not going to be looked at. Again, if you live in another country, what do you care what the value is on? Like you mentioned Argentina, where they have an interest rate now of 40%.
40%, yes, yeah.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up. You can if you're a politician, of course. You can make any.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Brian,
I have another question.
Well, this actually works in beautifully with the last question.
Oh, yes, it does too, because the question involves JP Morgan and also the Hunt brothers, but we stick to JP Morgan. Right now over here, I mean, the story is basically JP Morgan have storing 150 million ounces. They bought 150 million ounces of silver. Now, they're not doing that because they're expecting it to go down. So is this a sign? Are they getting prepared for the inevitable?
Remember, we began the conversation again about how I got started.
Yeah.
Go back to 1978. Nobody knew about it. My first buy of gold was $187.50 an ounce.
Right.
People, you couldn't find information about gold. Up until like in the early 2000s, you'd go to the websites of the like the CNBCs, the Bloombergs, the others. They didn't list the price of gold.
Right.
Gold wasn't, they made fun of you if you bought gold. Oh, you're a gloom and doomer. I'm answering your question in the sense that they tried to deny it for all of those years. And now they understand the value of it. And they always did, but they wanted to sell their Ponzi schemes.
Yeah,
so they wouldn't buy gold. So they know the value of it. So what is it? When I don't give financial advice. to friends that want to make changes. You know, you see where the stock market is going. I tell them, look, I don't give financial advice. If it was me and I was heavily invested in stocks, what would it cost me to put 10% of those assets into gold or silver? What am I going to lose? What's the downside risk? And again, our downside risk, and if you've been listening to me for years, you know I haven't changed the tune. I've said that gold, for about almost 5 years now, has to break strongly above 1485. And then when it breaks that, then it's a Bitcoin bounce, meaning it's going to skyrocket to 2,000 plus. I've been saying the downside risk of gold when it was down was around $1,100 an ounce. As you fellows well know, when you look at the data, whether it's coming from Peru or South Africa, when you average it out, what does it cost? $1,200 an ounce to pull the stuff out of the ground?
Yeah, about right.
Is it going to go much lower than that? So your downside risk is very small.
Very small. Yeah.
So when you talk about JP Morgan Chase and the others, they're hedging. They know that this thing is overinflated. They're not stupid. They're the head of the Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
So when that wild card is played, wherever it comes from, and however the card is played, and by the way, there's no wilder card than the Trump card. You know,
that's right.
They're hedging their bet. And they understand the value of it. But I'm telling you, and I'm saying this from experience, they used to ridicule you if you bought gold back up until, you know, maybe 2007.
Okay. Yeah.
2008. Then they started to look at the value of gold. So that's why they're doing it, as I believe.
Right. Yeah. Great. Yeah. You know, it's an interesting thing with gold. I often tell the story when I'm sitting down with somebody and say, if a neighbor moved in next door and you heard and you saw them unloading the truck and a big bolt was transferred into the house and you heard that it was full of gold, what would you be thinking at the time? And the answer is always the same. They would have to be rich. They would have to be rich. And so I say, well, so why don't you have some? I mean, if it's okay for rich people to have it, why wouldn't you want some too? And it's interesting, your comments, because you made reference to the fact that nobody sort of even thought about gold, but we hear about it all the time. Someone comes up with a great idea and it's a gold nugget. Did you pick up on that? Gold, that was golden advice. It's always associated with wealth, isn't it? And yet very few people have it. I still find it difficult to come to grips with this.
Well, I'll tell you a quick story.
Yes.
You know, I used to be on Oprah, the Today Show, as you mentioned.
Yes.
I used to be on everybody. I was on CNN all the time. Anyway, what happened was I had forecast what would happen with the Afghan war and then the Iraq war. And I got blackballed for a long time. Nobody wanted to hear it. So I had some little, you know, life is life. You know, you had some little downturns. So I needed some dough. And I've been buying gold again since 1978. So I go to my friends and I say, listen, man, could you loan me $25,000? Nobody wants to loan you $25,000. But here's the deal. I'll give you gold.
Right.
And here's the deal. Loan it to me for 5 years. In 5 years, if I can't pay you back, and I got friends that got money. 5 years, I can't pay you back. You keep the gold. And if it's worth less than it is when you loan me the money, I'll pay you the difference. Write it out, one little page thing. So I borrowed money from a bunch of friends. And then when I got back on my feet real quick. Gold prices started skyrocketing. Oh, they were so mad at me. They had to give me back the gold because I paid them all back. But I used that gold, you know, to go through a rough time.
Yes.
I didn't sell it. I used it as collateral.
Yes.
And they were happy to get it. And
Yeah.
I'm telling you, that one friend, he was so mad at me. He's like, damn it. The price had, gone up like, tripled or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, that's the other way, you could use it.
Yeah. Great story. Very true. Gerald, just an observation, and we've kept you up. Well, it's early over there, but it's almost midnight over here. But we're really enjoying this. Just an observation: new car sales in the US, they are advertising them at 25% off the sticker price. Interest rate hikes have led to a 4% reduction in mortgage applications in the US in the last quarter, followed by a 4% reduction in the previous quarter. 2018, store closures in the US are at record levels, projections indicating another 9,000 closures by the end of this year. Germany's biggest lender, Deutsche Bank, announced it will reduce its global workforce by 10,000 jobs worldwide, just 1 month after confirming it will reduce its workforce by 1,000 in the US. Its shares have fallen by almost a third this year. I'd say that these are really concerning indicators about our economic future. Can you just finally make a comment on that?
On the store closings, one of my books, Trends 2000, I wrote about the pall on the mall and how they were all becoming the same. There was the thrill of the mall situation was gone, and the country's been overbuilt, overstored, way too many stores. And now, of course, with online shopping.
Yes.
With online shopping in the States, I'm not positive, but I believe the number is anywhere between 13 to 18% of all retail sales.
Okay.
So you still have the majority in the stores. So the store closings are basically, as I see a lot of them, are the brands have become old, the uniqueness is gone, and they're overbuilt.
Yeah.
The other issue is real wages. And in the United States, the gap between the rich and the poor is the widest of any of the industrialized nations.
Right.
So what we're looking at are people struggling to make ends meet. When you look at home ownership, the millennials are living with their parents at rates we haven't seen in modern history because they can't afford, even with zero interest rate policy.
Yeah.
So yes, it's been overbuilt, particularly at the luxury end and at the higher ends, but you cannot afford to build now for the people to give them cheaper housing because material costs are so high.
Yeah.
So they're being frozen out of the market. Is this the beginning? Are these signals of a crash? Yes. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen, because when you're looking at their ability to keep fueling the economy with cheap money, they just keep the Ponzi scheme going.
Of course. Yeah.
And so that's what we're looking at.
Yep.
So it's very difficult to put a number of issues together and say, this is adding up to it. It was easy for me to do it. I took out the domain name, the Panic of 08 in 2007. That's what got me back on all the media. I called it before anyone.
Yes.
And I gave the facts why. Oh, subprime mortgages? Oh, great. You don't have a job? Got no future? Don't worry about it. Sign
Don't
up
worry about it. Yeah.
to buy a house.
Yeah.
He was making his stuff up. And yeah, if people, the .com bubble, I saw that one, but this one is different. It's different because they're going to do everything they can to keep it going. Now, having said all that, keep it going. Keep devaluing those currencies. And that's why I'm a firm believer in gold. But again, my forecast for gold, short term is 1375. It has to break over that. Excuse me, 1385.
85, yeah.
1385 has to break over that, stay over that a bit. 1450 to me is the breakout point. I've been saying this for nearly almost about 4.5 years. It hasn't broken above that. It has to break above that, stay strong, and then shoot forward. Yeah. But the downside risk at this point, if we're going to say gold is $1,300 an ounce, what do we got, another $100? That's no downside risk for a long-term investment. And again, I'm not giving financial advice. I'm a forecaster. Yeah. So that's the way I see it.
Yeah.
Why, to me, and only speaking for myself, why would I want to be in a currency that, and why did Bitcoin become so strong initially? Because it was looked upon as an alternative
absolutely
to fiat currency.
Correct. Yeah. I have a very good friend. He's been my lifetime mentor, a gentleman by the name of Peter Daniels Sr. He is a billionaire. He lives here in Adelaide, just outside of Adelaide, country village called Macclesfield. And every time I connect with him, he reminds me, he says, Darryl, and he's a great supporter of gold, Gerald, and has a lot of it. And he says, Darryl, I don't really care what happens tonight. It doesn't impact on me. I will still party tomorrow, because he's taken away all the risk as a holder of precious metals. And I think that's the huge benefit, and you've spoken about it as well. I think that's the huge benefit that we all have if once we understand the benefits of precious metals.
Yeah, again, I used it as collateral when I was going through some economic problems.
Yeah.
Okay, again, you don't ask a friend to loan you money. Nobody wants to loan you money. But when you give them collateral, they're happy, Especially shiny gold collateral. Oh, yeah, okay, I'll do it. Yeah, just sign over here. So, and look, gold's been around forever. It's not going away.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And your friend says about partying. Mine is you better boogie before the lights go out, because tomorrow is iffy.
Gerald, I just want to just a very quick question, and then Darryl, you will finish off. You've already sort of answered this, but I sit down with a lot of people around the family tables with them and whatever, and they ask me the question, and I say the same thing. I'm not a financial advisor, but by the end of 2018, where do you think gold will be? And maybe 2020, where do you think gold will be?
It depends on interest rates in the U.S. And I can't predict what they're going to do.
No, that's right.
And if they raise interest rates 3 more times, gold's going to have downward pressure. However, having said that, if they do that, then you're going to see massive downward pressure on other currencies. You're already seeing it. You talked about the Turkish lira, the Argentinian peso, the Venezuelan bolivar. You're seeing, whether it's Indonesia, you're seeing India, you're seeing downward pressure on all these currencies as the dollar is getting stronger. So they're in a catch-22, as I said, and so that's it depends on the interest rate scheme, because if they raise interest rates too much, you're going to see the emerging markets crash.
Yeah, right.
And they're already under pressure already. So again, it's hard to predict the timing of this. And, I rarely can you predict when, but I would say now, again, as I said it, I think gold is near its bottom.
Yeah.
Again, $100 down is no risk for me if I'm buying and holding.
Yes. Yeah. Gerald, Look, we are so appreciative of the information you've given us tonight, and to come online and allow us to interview you. It's been terrific. I'm going to make it a commitment to come over and meet you in person. That would be terrific. I would just love to do that.
Oh, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we sign off tonight, though, we do have an announcement that we want to make. This is for our viewers in the United States of America in particular. As of tonight, we're open for business in the United States of America. So that's sensational.
Oh, wow.
The link to our USA website is below in the video description. Alternatively, if you'd like to send us an email, our email address will also be listed below. Hey guys, we would just absolutely love to hear from you. More important, just as importantly, in addition, I'm sure that there's a number of viewers, our subscribers, that would like to connect with Gerald. We'd like to know if they'd like to know more about your work and the Trends Research Institute. If our viewers would like to take advantage and subscribe to the Trends Journal and read and hear about history before it happens, which is so powerful, what would they need to do, Gerald? What's the process? What would they need to do?
Yeah, just go to Trends Research or trendsjournal.com, and it's only $99 a year.
Wow.
And we have the magazine, which is now monthly.
Yep.
We put out trend alerts each week. We do Trends in the News broadcasts, and Monday through Thursday, and a Friday Trends special. And, as you mentioned, it's history before it happens. And we've been at this, a long, long time, and we stand by our track record and put it up against anyone's, when it comes to trends.
Fantastic. Look, Gerald, it's been an absolute privilege having you on board tonight. I would suggest to you, we would love to do this again. We'd really look forward to doing that as things progress through the year. Would love to be able to do an interview similar to this again in the very foreseeable future. But we know you're a busy man and really appreciate your time. It's been a fabulous interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And when you come up here, we could do a broadcast out of our offices over here, and you'll see we're on the most historic four corners in America, the only place with pre-Revolutionary War stone buildings on each corner. And we own three. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I think we've organised a date. We'll
right.
organise a date. Absolutely. Okay.
All right.
Really look forward to that. Thank you so much,
guys.
Gerald. Really appreciate your time. It's been a
Thank
privilege.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.